Hello, welcome to Good Questions, Good Answer. Today, we have another interesting question from our audience. And again, Venerable Sander joining us to solve the problem. Now, today, many people having time to get close to each other. So thus, they have the question that's come to us. How can we prolong our marriage and living together happily? So, Venerable Sander, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you for having me on the program.
All right, thank you very much. Well, good to have you back, and also hope you enjoy your lunch. Now,
That will be fine.
okay. Now let's get back to our problem. So, well, you see, people are having time to stay together. What do you have to say about this marriage problem that we need to solve?
Yes, this is connecting with the topic that we previously talked about, how to live together with difficult people. Right
Very
now,
good.
we are talking on a more general question, how we can stay together in a happy marriage. So last time we talked about truth being the foundation of a good relationship.
Yes.
And this is important because from many angles, not only is it important to be sincere towards each other, not having any secrets. It's also important, and when we talk with each other, as any good therapist can tell you, you have to talk from what you are and what you feel, rather than always accusing one another. Reality of life is that we do not really know anyone else except for ourselves, and even ourselves we don't really know.
Very true. Yes. Well, you see, when we are not know each other, so therefore, to get to know each other, we have to be open mind. Share, speak your heart, speak your mind out. But of course, it has to be very careful too, because sometimes the words can get to their mind quite delicate. So it could be some problem. So therefore, choose wisely before you speak.
Right, exactly. And so it's not only about the words that you choose, but also speaking from your heart, speaking from what you are and what you feel and what is important for you, rather than always trying to accuse or change the other person. So this is sincere, it's open, it's transparent. It's also just simply relating to what is really in your own control, which is what you are, rather than trying to change the other person or trying to have all sorts of accusations about the other person, which are often incorrect or not completely to the point. Another important point, of course, is that we cannot expect a relationship to be able to continue if we are not never adjusting towards each other. So, previous I already talked about self-control and self-development being important in a relationship, in a marriage. So this is where in which we have to realize that there is not, as we already discussed in the episode about that, each person is right, but we are all wrong. The metaphor of the elephant and the blind. So
Yes.
that it was in the previous episode.
Yes.
So everyone is never completely right.
No,
Each
not at all.
Yes. So we have to learn to recognize that the other person's view is usually complementary to our own, and that if we are just be quiet and learn to understand ourselves, and we can also learn to understand the other person better if we have a quiet mind. If we learn to listen more to the other person, we also going to have to need patience. And patience is not just waiting or being good at waiting, but it's actually much more than that. Patience is being able to tolerate any other person. Now, that's not only important to prevent anger and conflict, but it's also important to prevent boredom. Because very often relationships do not break up because of very violent conflict, but simply because people get bored with one another, which
Well,
is actually is also a subtle form of intolerance.
it's also because people don't give importance to each other. Maybe that's also part of the problem. That's why people begin to getting bored on that. You see, sometimes when they start having, imagine this, when before they get married, they have to, be attracted to each other. So you have to give importance to everyone. But then as time goes by, you get to know each other, you get bored because that feeling of being important is less and less. And in the end, they start off and cheat out on somebody else. So this is something that could be also softened if we just recall on the first time we met and try to treat each
Right.
other the way we have done before. So it just need to be remain the same equivalent treatment to each other. So this way can prolong our relationship.
But it's true that we tend to look at the weaknesses of other people, even the ones that are perhaps even more the ones that are close to us. So when we are in the habit of looking at people's weaknesses, we're going to get bored with them. We're going to get fed up. So it's important that we try to refresh and renew our mind through patience and
Also create
through
something
patience and
new
tolerance.
excitement, new story, new happiness. So
Well,
this way,
that too, and also looking at the good qualities
yeah.
of people. There's a lot we just don't look at so much. Usually, when people are in a marriage or a long-term relationship, people are know each other's habits, but they don't often think maybe about all the good habits their loved ones has until maybe maybe they meet somebody else who's much worse, and then they start to think, well, actually my previous lover, my previous husband or wife was much better, and then I never realized it. So we often tend to compare with a better situation. As they say in Dutch language, the grass of our neighbor is always greener. But that, of course, is part of the problem with lack of patience or boredom. And the way we fix that is by learning to practice every day, just to look at a good quality of the other person every day. You can write it down, you can note it, you can practice that. And the other thing is that we can meditate because it helps us to refresh our mind and to look at things anew.
That's right on. Yes. Well, I think I agree with that. So, well, speaking of the marriage advice, I recall of the things about the lady Visakha that her father gave her this advice before she part to live on with her husband. Can you recall that for our audience?
To start first, we have to mention that it's important that we realize that these 10 forms of advice are not from the Buddha himself, but they are a teaching which is from one of the one of the wise disciples of the Buddha. But they're good advice, but of course they are a little cultural, but we can adjust it accordingly. So
Okay.
the first advice, there's sort of a rhyme in it, a sort of a simple short word and rhyme in it. Don't carry the indoor fire outside. That is the first one. Don't carry the outdoor fire inside. Give only to him that gives. Give not to him that gives not. Give both to him that gives and to him that gives not. Sit
You need to
happily,
clarify a
eat
bit on that.
happily, sleep happily, tend the fire, and honor the household devas or the household deities. So, this is, of course, a complete riddle to any outsider.
Exactly. Maybe you want to clarify a little bit. Maybe you
Perhaps
can
that would be
explain
necessary. Yes.
more.
So it's interesting that in that time, actually, the Visakha, she immediately understood because she was also very wise and she was also close to enlightenment. So this was like spoken from one wise person to another, and so they used sort of short word. Anyway, the first meaning is that if you are in a marriage or a relationship, whatever happens in that relationship, be careful in talking it over with other people outside the relationship in a way that might lead to gossip or might lead to lack of sincerity. Of course, if you talk about something with your loved ones, it's a bit of a secret that you share. I mean, it's a private matter, let me put it that way. It's not secret, but it's private. So we should be very careful if we ever going to mention anything at all with our friends about our loved ones. The other thing, of course, also holds true, that if anything is happening in our life, for example, if our friends talk badly about our loved one, then we should not tell them, or we should not be the person who always, who brings in gossip from outside of your house, inside of your house. That is the meaning of the second phrase. The third phrase is give only to him that gives. That means that if we are lending something to somebody else, then we should only do that to people who we know that will return, that in the habit of returning what you give to them. In other words, this is basically about managing financial stability, being careful about your finances of the household. And then the fourth one, give not to him that gives not. So you do not borrow things to somebody who doesn't return them. Okay.
So you should
Then,
not
of
share.
course, the third one makes it all more difficult. Gives both to him that gives and to him that gives not. So it looks like it's contradicting, right?
Yeah.
Well, this means that some people are just very poor, and some people we know they will tell us in advance that they can't repay us, but they still seek our assistance, or they still seek our help. Then we should give to him, because it's not only it's all about trust. Okay, so if we know that they have good faith, they have good intentions, but they simply cannot return the things that we borrowed them, which is usually money in the modern times, then that is just okay, because we know that they're sincere, but they simply cannot return it. And that is, of course, also depending on the agreements you make in advance. Then the second or the third set, you could say, item number, how much is it? Number 6.
Yeah, number
Sit
6.
happily. Sit happily means that when the family of this is of course talking about Visakha, when the family of her husband comes in, then she should respect them. Translated in modern terms, it means that we should respect the family of our loved ones, of our loved one, of our husband or wife, our partner, because it's even though we have not chosen to marry with them, they are part of the package. They're part of the deal. We cannot ignore them. I've heard of people who told. I heard of a woman who told her husband that if you do not uh, um, get rid of your brother, who was also visiting the house often, then I will not continue this marriage. And that was a very sad thing, because eventually the husband then therefore chose to leave her. So we should be tolerant. We should know in advance that if we're going to marry with somebody or have a long-term relationship, then we will have to, often meet their family, and we cannot always, try to prevent that from happening. We have to be tolerant and accepting. There's always people in our lives that we didn't want to be in our lives, that we didn't choose to have in our lives. But that can be an assignment or a practice in itself, if we look at it that way, making us more open-minded. So the second, the next item, which is now
Yes, eat happily.
eat happily. Thank you. Eat happily means that a wife should not eat before her mother-in-law and her father-in-law. It's actually if you put it in, that is very traditionally put, but it comes down to the same thing, like respecting the family of your husband in the case of a wife, and of the wife in case of the husband.
Mm.
And it also sleep happily has a similar meaning, but it also refers to respecting your partner. So when you're doing something, when you're working together, when you're doing the household, we should help each other out. And if you are, for example, the advice that Tananchaya gives to Visakha here is that when her husband is has not started to sleep yet, that we should not go to sleep. We should get the work finished first. Of course, in the modern days, we could say it holds for both. We should work together, help together, because in the present day, many women work. So it's common that we should help each other in the household work and in other duties, and not leave the other person behind.
Mm.
Then the ninth item, tend the fire. This refers to the tradition uh, which existed before Buddhism, that there was a custom that people had a fire inside the house, which they tended to respect the deities, respect Brahma, the great god, in those days. Of course, Buddhism did not believe in such matters, but it's a symbol here. It simply means that we should respect the family in law, the people who are the family of our husband or wife.
Mm.
And the 10th item is the similar item. So it's very common in Buddhism that religious terminology from previous to Buddhism that existed before Buddhism is transformed and given a new meaning, which is often more ethical than ceremonial. So this is, in short, you could bring it down to 3 points. Take good care of your words, take good care of your shared money. And that is a good point, because we often, in the present day, people often find it difficult to share. Everyone has his own thing. Some people are married for many years and they never share any money.
Mm.
Take good care of your in-laws is therefore also very important. Now, to come back to the point about criticism, it's quite interesting, because it can happen. I once met a couple, a Thai person, a Thai woman, and a Dutch man. They were going to get married. They asked me for marriage advice, and then I simply told them that there were people who were gossiping about them. So I told them in advance that don't be too affected by the criticism that people are going to give. People always have critics. Everyone has people who criticizes them. This is normal.
Kind of like the story I came across a long time ago when I was a kid about the Aesop tale about the mirror and his
Right.
father and his son. So can
Yes.
you recall that story about the mirror?
Yes. And it is interesting, because this story is very old. Many of these stories people don't really know where they come from. So Aesop is one of the first people who wrote it down. So this story is about a miller and his son and their donkey. They want to travel to the big city so they can sell the donkey on the market. So first they decide that they're going to travel both on the donkey, and they cross the village. Now, when they cross the village, they're both sitting on the donkey. The villagers, they complain. They start to criticize them. They say, why are you sitting on that donkey? It's both sitting on the donkey. The donkey is going to suffer a lot. Why do you do that? And they might also have criticized them. Well, if you're going to sit on a donkey like that, both of you, by the time you get to the market, the donkey will have suffered so much that it won't be any worth. It won't give you any money if you sell it. So they started to do it differently. So the son sat on the donkey, and the miller just walked beside the donkey. and they continued to the next village. In the next village, the people, they saw them, they started to talking immediately behind their backs, but they knew, they heard it. They said, this is a very ungrateful boy, you know. This
Mhm.
little boy doesn't respect his father at all. He lets his old father walk beside the donkey and not respecting him at all. And the father is getting very old and tired, and he's just sitting there. Look at him! Look at him! So they were very criticizing them. So they heard that, and the miller was very sensitive to criticism, as he generally was. So he said, "Well, maybe you should then walk. Okay, Your father will sit on the donkey." And so he sat on the donkey himself and continued to the next village. And when they came to the next village, of course, probably by now you can already guess that the villagers were still not happy. They were talking and talking, and they said, "This is a very cruel dad, isn't he? Very cruel father. He lets his son walk besides the donkey all the time, and he himself, look at him, sitting very relaxed, and his little son is walking for miles and miles and miles, and he's all tired. He's a very cruel father, very cruel. I suppose that when they're back at home, he's just hitting him, and he's just beating him all the time." And they were gossiping and gossiping like this. And when people gossip, one person says A, and the next person says AA, and the third person says AAA, and it becomes a bigger and bigger story.
Mhm.
So eventually, they were kind of confused what to do next, because the miller was always sensitive to criticism. And
Mhm.
so they both would walk besides the donkey, and then in that way, nobody could criticize them, right?
Yeah.
No, think again. When they came to the next village, the people criticized them again. They said, "What kind of stupid person would walk a donkey all the way to the big city and not sit on it at all? Why would you not sit on it? If you're not sitting on it, then then you will be very tired. And why would you do that? You have a donkey at your disposal and you're not using it at all." So then they didn't know what to do anymore. They were very confused. So they thought, well, if they are criticizing us that much, there's only one thing left we can do. Do you know?
The carrier, the donkey.
You know the story very well. Yeah, so the miller, he decided he was going to carry the donkey on his back or on a pole or something like that. It depends on which version of the story you hear.
Mhm.
So eventually, this looked all very funny, of course. So when they got to the city, the big city, they arrived. The miller and the son, they were carrying the donkey, and they looked very funny. Why would they carry a donkey like that? So uh, the people started laughing a lot, and the people looked at them and pointed at them, and of course the donkey got very uneasy. It didn't feel very easy. It got very restless. So it 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 jumped off the back of the pole, and it ran off, and it jumped into the water. These animals can also swim. So it just swam away into the distance. And then the miller, he just complained. He said to himself and his son, he said, if I just stop listening to all this gossip of all these people from the start, I would still have my donkey to sell at a good price now.
Mm.
And then he just shook his head, and that is the end of the story.
Mm.
So this story shows that we should not take too much notice of what people criticize us for. Or in the words of the Buddha, there is no one in the world who has not been criticized.
Yes.
There's actually one author who said, he put it quite apt, and said that if you don't want to be criticized, don't think anything, don't say anything, and don't do anything. Can you do
Stay
that?
silent. Well, it is something that we cannot avoid. It's just the nature of this world that we are unable to escape criticisms, no matter how
Right,
good you are. But still, what we should be careful are our words. So this way,
right,
to prolong our relationship, it is the only choice that can also mend our relationship, whether how bad it is. So if we use and choose carefully our word to communicate with each other, we can make and get the situation in our control. Of course, these are something that also needs to be practiced. It just won't come in a matter of a second. So therefore, you're
Right.
gonna have to observe and learn each other, what one's like, what one dislike. So this way, you can pay attention and take good care. And that's you start I would call start to pay attention and give importance to each other in this way too.
I would also like to add that it's also very important that we do good together.
Yes. Mhm.
If we do practice the moral principles, as we call in Buddhism the five silas, as I mentioned in previous episodes, if
Yes.
we practice those together and we also meditate together, there's so much you share. There's so many good things you can think about together, and it will strengthen your relationship a lot.
Yes, to have the same kind of ideas, in order to live together, each other must have the same level of intelligence. I mean, level of ideas to do things, to say things, and to think quite similar. So this way allow them to have less conflict. The conflict arises because when people are having different kind of opinion, so that when they say things, speak things, it tend to rise to the conflict because of misunderstanding. This also showing that people have different kind of view, different background. That is why they do not have the same opinion. Sometimes when we confront argument or conflict within the family or in our marriage, remember, sometimes you're gonna have to forgive and forget too. So this way you can continue and prolong relationship. And most of all, when we have misunderstood one another, rather than just try to confront solving by using your own opinion to win one another, this is not gonna solve any problem. But instead, stop, pause your mind a little bit, and looking down on different angle can also help. And this is how we can prolong our relationship in the family and in our marriage. So that's everyone. Hopefully, the answer from our Venerable Sander can also maybe giving you idea how to prolong relationship and having a good family life from now on. Thank you, Venerable Sander, for helping this problem.
Thank you very much, Venerable PC.
You're welcome, and we hope to see you again next question. Good questions, good answer. Thank you. See you again next time. Next question. Bye bye.